Hello, and welcome everybody to our podcast, Unpacking Organizations. My name is Shradha, and I have with me here Rupert as my co host. We just talk about our passion topics here.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue. See tomorrow's business, today.
Today's topic is something that I had not heard about before, even after my decade and a half experience in org design, and that is HOWWIP. Rupert talks about it in his book. And is that how you call it, Rupert? HOWWIP?
Hi everyone. Yeah, it's HOWWIP, which
WIP.
which is an acronym
Okay.
for How Will It Work in Practice?
Awesome. And it looks like that is a framework, that's an approach that you apply to actually make it all real, the macro and the micro design real. So, shall we dive into that today for our listeners?
Great. Let's go for it. Let's do it.
Awesome. So, how did you come up with that framework? What actually led to it? And how do you put that in action in real world?
So I developed it quite a long time ago, um, in two parts. One, when I was actually doing in the early days consulting work, I just wanted people to understand how the organization was going to work in practice, and so to get people to do that, I was creating games, workshop games, role play games, so that if you're going into a new role, you could actually understand what the new role was going to be, and and you could also understand the interfaces because the one of the big challenges in org design isn't so much understanding what's in the box, i.e., what every different person does. It's the intersection, it's the interfaces between the boxes, and then the gaps and the things that fall between it.
And I think I would like to pause because that is very, very important point. Like we design boxes, but we miss designing the interconnectivity and how it will all interact with each other. And invariably, those intersections create tensions in the organization. And so, how do we resolve for that tension? And then it all becomes like something which we need to do real time. We've never thought about it before, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even if it's, I mean, yes, tensions is one thing. Ambiguity, lack of clarity.
Hmm,
So
absolutely.
who has the monkey on the shoulder
Right.
for certain scenarios, for certain questions? And when you do process design and activity design and accountability mapping and to be accountability mapping, it's fairly abstract, and you can only go by definition. You have to go at quite a high level.
Mm.
Um, so you're trying to get the main chunks of work and the main chunks of accountability. But when you start thinking about execution and doing it for real, lots and lots of questions come up. And what you want to do is, as much as possible, is clarify a lot of these questions pre the actual implementation. Because
So
when
how
you
do you do
actually,
that? Like, can you
so
give an
yeah,
example?
I'll give lots of examples, and I also want to do a call out actually. So I was playing with this and playing with these games, and then one of my colleagues in the early days of Orgvue, and it was a gentleman called Giles Slinger. So I just want to call out Giles because he and I worked very closely on this, and this concept. And Giles was really big about making things practical as well. So I had a lot of fun when we were creating the DDoD training. This is in the early 2010s, and we were developing the courses, and we're like, how do we get people to actually understand the design that they've come up with, and and also not to fall into the trap. So one of the other traps, before I get into some of the examples, is you can get into I want to swim lane everything, and I want to create all these
Mm.
swim lane process diagrams.
Absolutely. We all have
And
grown up with that.
yeah, so then there's a real risk that you say, well, let's go and process map everything. And actually, most of the time you don't need to, and most of the time most processes don't actually work that way in most industries. So it's an overkill, and then it's a little bit like the whole racy debate. It's like, what is actually done with those process maps? Now, if you're doing it for systems implementation and you're putting in Workday and you need to process map everything because a system has to help execute, that's a different thing. But from an org design context, you don't need that most of the time, which is why I spent a lot of time in DDOD talking about the different levels of activity mapping. That's probably a podcast for another day. So sometimes if the process is unclear and there are lots of handoffs, one exercise is to do, I call a level 2 process map with the swim lanes and the handoffs, so you can visualize the process. But there are other games that are more fun. One is just to have a group of people in role, so it's a role play, and you throw a question, a challenge, and an issue out there, and then people say, "Well, I've got the monkey," and they talk through what they're doing, and then I hand over, and it's like you throw it like a tennis ball or something to the person that you know your output becomes their input, and you talk through, and then what you're doing in that little process is that there's a facilitator when something's not clear, when people are like, well, I don't know what to do, or what, I shouldn't get this, or you should give this to me early, or practical things. You write those down, and they become, I call them HOWWIP log. It's kind of like an issues log, but it's like how will it work in practice questions. And so you just write those down, and then you try and get answers to those questions. And that's just a way, really tangible questions that will help people unpick how it's going to work.
I actually love that exercise because it makes people think real time and actually think the issues that they will face, not just a superficial org design or job descriptions, but actually, like, when they are in this role and when the work comes, what is the frustration that comes with that tennis ball, if you will, and how they are going to pass it on further. It just I can totally see that unpacking so many challenges that people face after the org design is institutionalized, uh, before, like, rather than before. So
Yeah,
love that.
exactly. And so you're really trying to tease out the issues. But
Right.
so another one is I talk a lot about give get matrices. So you have, the list of roles, and each role gives certain things. Your outputs go to other roles, and then you also get things from others. So think of as a on the rows is give and the columns is get. And so imagine I am the CFO and you are the divisional, CMO. I give you your top down marketing budget. You give to me your plan. That's a negotiation. You try and work it through, right? So who's giving what? I give the high level targets. This is what we need to achieve from a sales and what have you. Then you tell me what you need. So what are you giving? What are you getting? So that's a way of understanding all the intersections and interdependencies. But then a HOWWIP game is, which I've applied as speed dating. What's inspired by speed dating? It's not speed dating. It's inspired by speed dating. And you have the two people in the two roles with a facilitator, and they say, well, this is what I am giving to you, and this is what I expect to get from you, and vice versa. And then all these issues, these challenges. No, I need this. I need this. Then all these things that are going to cause friction between those two roles and the gaps, or things that I'm expecting this from you. Well, I'm not going to get that. That's not part of my role. So you tease that out as well, and you're really trying to tease out the gaps. Um, so, and as part of the design process, what we'd have with the How Up issue log is just a running log, and you just go through, have we answered these? And the answers, that also starts to inform things like your Q&A and how, and all these sorts of things. And it gets to, I hear all the time, people who are affected by organization design. They're saying, well, my role hasn't changed. It's just changing chairs on the Titanic. And how's this going to impact me anyway? And it's just all nonsense. And, the cynical disillusion kind of comes in. Well, if you do this, you're actually getting people to be clear about how this change in new world is really going to operate.
And another thing which I feel that it will lead to is that whenever this is happening, invariably there is a different room in which people are just venting out. and talking about that how this will not work, but those inputs never make it to the real discussion because people are just talking about, okay, on papers this org looks okay, and people are more, I would say, nicer in that sense, are not being authentic. But when you're playing games and when you're pushing them to do these thinking, things come out on the surface, which is extremely important for the working of the organization in the long term.
Exactly, 100%. And it's amazing all the politics that you avoid.
Hmm.
And just the lack of the fear as well. Like, oh, I don't know what it's going to be. The inability to ask the questions, to ask the silly questions, or and you can do it. By the way, you don't need to have the person who's in the role doing the role play. I mean, it's ideal if they are, but if you're really trying to think through, say at the macro design level, you can role play like different scenarios. Say, well, how would this option work in practice versus this option? So we had option A versus option B. Let's role play that in these different roles and have people play that. And I just think playing, thinking, it's a way of getting to deeper thinking. And if it's playful, I think we just think better, right? It just takes the tension out of it.
Oh, absolutely. And especially for these things where there's so much of dynamics around people's role changing, people's job losing out, right? There's so much of tension during these kind of workshops that bringing in that playfulness, I think, is game changer in that sense. And my wheels are turning that next time when I do, I'm going to do these things. How do you set the level for it? Like, how do you actually invite people to do these things? Because I would imagine the first time they're doing it, they must be very awkward, but over the course of time they open up. So how do you actually break the ice and invite people to do this kind of silly games?
So one, I mean, you can do it pre selection, and it's
Mm-hmm.
more slightly more theoretical, or you can do it post selection, and it's a way of onboarding and embedding the organization. Um, so let's just say it's post. So you have selected who's going to be in each of the different roles, and it's almost like part of the kickoff of the new organization. Uh, Taking people off site is really important. Allowing enough time, right, so that you're not pressured by time, and it requires good facilitation, and it requires really good ability to park issues. That's why the log is so important. So it's just being honest with everyone that we have not thought of everything. We can't have. So let's say it's the post. Let's tease this out and see how it's going to work, and make sure it's fit for purpose before you actually start executing in that role. Before that handover. And then what it also does, if say you're doing it at the leadership level, then and maybe before the announcement to everyone, or just as they're embedding, it becomes more tangible for them, and the case for change and everything is more tangible, so they can live and breathe this before it's even happened, so they can explain it. And if there are howlers, like big design flaws, you catch them early so you can address them. So it's going to avoid really expensive mistakes. So that's part of it as well. So the setup is really important. If you set this up and say, we have all the answers because look how clever we are. We're so clever. We thought about everything. Here it is. We're going to play this game, but actually, it's not playful. It's just like you do your thing, and so you can learn your role, and then kind of then it's probably not going to go very well. And if you put time pressure, so we've got to get it done in an hour in the office and amongst all the back-to-back meetings, and it's not going to work very well if it's not in person. So because it's about rapport and problem solving. So this is a time when being in person, whiteboards, a nice environment, uh, and if someone, let's imagine someone's being promoted into the new role and they're more junior relatively and they have to, well, it's a great time for them to get to know their new colleagues in different functions. And when there are tensions, because there are always tensions, you can get those out and say, well, this is how we're going to address these tensions. And that's where the leaders, of those groups, can start to work that through. Um,
I'm
yeah,
really energized listening to all of this because it can solve for so many challenges that we see in a real org design, post org design workshops or post org design changes, and this gets to the crux of it in a playful way that people are more and in a more engaging way, right? Like
yeah,
everybody is there. I can totally imagine a senior leader bringing their leadership team together in an offsite and doing this kind of a game
yeah.
and really getting a lot of out of it. So
And the thing is if you're presenting everything through the PowerPoint and you're presenting the accountability and who's accountable for what, so the accountability matrices, and you're presenting the roles and the flows. I mean, it is it's dull as dishwater.
that is so
And
true.
you just
I cannot see one more racy charts up there on
you
the
you
slides.
so it just cognitively you're switching off. You're just not absorbing it.
So true.
And so to get people to absorb the information and to make it come to life, because the whole thing about making it real in these exercises is to make it real. It's to bring the organization that's going to be to life. Right? It's no, I say a lot, macro and micro. The design phase is theoretical, but you have to go from theory to practice, and you can't just do that in one step, right? And so this is accelerating that. And look, I mean, the military and things like that, you do war games, right? You do scenarios. If you're learning a sport, like I love rugby, you do shadow rugby, you do plays, you're role playing the real life. You practice. If you're in theater, right, you don't just go out and perform, you practice. This is practice. This is getting into it. So you're understanding. That's what sports people do. That's what musicians do. That's what actors do,
This
and
is
then
a
here we are
amazing call out.
leading. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, where are we practicing what we need to do for the most part of our lives as a leader, right? Like, we need to practice that in a more, um, in a setting which is not so pressure cooker and stressful environment.
yeah.
We need to, yeah, I
We,
think
we have we have this thing in because I coach rugby, the whole and the part. And what you're doing is the whole is the game, the full game with all the complexity of the game. And so the best you want to practice the whole all the time. And but then let's say there's a set of skills or something that's not quite working. That's the part. You break it down. You say, right, let's now practice the part. Let's train the part. You do that, and then you go back to the whole. And the way I'm trained to coach rugby is to constantly go whole part, whole part. And the old fashioned way that, like when I was learning to play rugby, we would start at the beginning and it was exercise, and then they would beast us. So they would try and kill us physically. Then we'd do skills, and then we'd play a game. Um, so the only fun bit is the ask at the end of the game. So the modern way to make it fun is game, 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 game the whole way through, whole games, part games. And by the way, by doing this and by keeping it active, you get the fitness anyway. Now, and if you need to improve your fitness, I can destroy you in 3 minutes. Really intense 3 minutes, you can have a blowout. And so to an extent, it's applying that kind of philosophy into this org design environment. We need to practice. We need to bring this organization to life. How do we do it? We devise games. The part is there is this issue, there is this process. How is this going to work? Right? And then you're going through that. You're role playing. You're testing. Okay, this makes sense. So that when you have to do it for real, because you will have to do these things for real, you've done it before. You've visualized it. You've worked it through, and then a lot of the tension will be taken out. And who knows? You might even have fun.
this is such a powerful technique, approach, and philosophy. I really enjoyed listening to this conversation, Rupert, because we really need to build this muscle into the organization, because we think about, exactly to your point, we think about training people in a very different setting, in a classroom setting or in a Zoom setting, but we don't most of the time we don't help them apply that training in that setting, but we help them just put them into the real world, that just go there and apply that training, which does not happen.
There's a big difference between educating someone in the sense of this is the theory and then the practice. And so if you're learning maths, they can go out there and they can teach you how to solve differential equations or algebra or something, but you have only learned it when you're practicing under different scenarios. And it's that repetition, right, that makes us good at doing something. Purposeful practice, repetition, etc. So here we are. Org design is one of the six most important things for a CEO to nail, according to the CEO Excellence book from McKinsey. I've quoted this many times. They called it org alignment with culture and talent and org design. So it's one of the most important things. It's one of the biggest levers. And so you spend all this money doing all this analysis, doing all this design work and what have you, and then what? I'll just go off and go and work it out. It's barking mad. So hopefully people find this useful.
I found it very useful. I have so many takeaways, but my biggest takeaway is just apply it. I am going to design a workshop, or just in a very small setting, try to start experimenting with how can we make it all real. So, how whip. But, Rupert, what is one takeaway that you have for our listeners?
One takeaway, and then the other is going to be a request. I'll do the request first.
Sure.
Get that over out of the way. If you apply this and you find it useful and you get learnings from it, could you please share on LinkedIn what you did and how it was useful? Because we need to share it, and it's not just Shradha and I spouting these things off. We'd love to hear from you, our listeners. So if
Right.
you do this, please share and let us know. It will make our lives a lot better. Just knowing that, this is added value for someone, not just ourselves.
Yes. Even one
Um,
impact is the impact that we want to create.
exactly. Please be that one person. We will sleep a lot better at night. The and my takeaway is fun. You this HOWWIP HOWWIP exercises should be enjoyable. People should be smiling, even if it's very serious. Um, Subject, you're breaking it down. And when it's fun, it means it's safe. There's clear goals. You're progressing. You're improving. It's linked to flow. So please design it to be fun. Please, you will build relationships by doing this, by making it fun, and the team will grow together. And then when you're in the fire, when things are really difficult, they'll have the inventory of the relationship and the goodwill to get through stuff.
And they can fall
Um,
back to that workshop. They can always say
exactly.
that, Remember in that workshop we had such a fun time or a tough time unpacking that, and now it is playing out in real life, so how do we do that? And absolutely. And I feel that, yeah, this is really something that all the org design practitioners should make a part of their approach. I feel that org design will be incomplete if we don't utilize that phase into our design process. So that is my request for everybody who's listening out there and who's an org design practitioner, that use it, and it will be helpful. And let us know then.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Okay.
Shredder.
Thank you. Thank you, Rupert.